Welcome to Outside Views, and today we're diving into a topic that has sparked some intense speculation. Whether the UK could eventually give up Gibraltar following the recent decision to return control of the Chagas Islands to Mauritius. This question has surfaced in the media this month, and it's triggered renewed discussions around the status of Gibraltar, its future, and the consequence of Brexit on this tiny but geopolitically significant territory. So let's unpack what's happening and examine if there's any real reason to worry about Gibraltar's future under British rule. The backdrop to this conversation is the UK's decision to hand sovereignty of the Chagas Islands back to Mauritius, a move that stirred up plenty of debate. Fabian Picardo, Gibraltar's chief minister, was quick to address the media, appearing on the BBC to reassure everyone that the Chagas decision set absolutely no precedent whatsoever for Gibraltar. But despite this assurance, the comparisons have been hard to ignore. After all, both Gibraltar and the Chagas Islands are British overseas territories, and for many observers, the UK's willingness to return one territory raised the inevitable question, could Gibraltar be next? Picardo's message was clear: there's no risk to Gibraltar's status as a British territory. But as with many political issues, it's not quite that simple. First, we need to remember the historical context. Gibraltar has been under British rule since the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, and while it has remained a point of tension between the UK and Spain, the people of Gibraltar have consistently expressed their desire to remain British. In a 2002 referendum, Gibraltarians overwhelmingly rejected the idea of shared sovereignty with Spain. But while the issue of sovereignty is always simmering in the background, the more immediate concern for Gibraltar's residents, workers, and visitors isn't about whether they'll suddenly become Spanish. It's about the impact of Brexit. And that's where the real problems lies. Gibraltar overwhelmingly voted to remain in the EU during the 2016 referendum. 96% of voters rejected Brexit. But despite that, they've had to deal with the consequences of the UK's decision to leave the European Union. Gibraltar was excluded from the UK-EU withdrawal agreement, and ever since it has existed in a kind of limbo. There have been prolonged negotiations between the UK, Spain, and the European Commission, but no final agreement has been reached on Gibraltar's post-Brexit status. As a result, many of the Brexit rules that have hit other parts of the UK haven't yet been fully enforced in Gibraltar. But that's all about to change. Starting in November, the new EU biometric control requirements for non-EU citizens will come into effect. For Gibraltar, this means that people crossing the land border from Spain will face stricter checks. And that's a big deal, because every day around 15,000 people cross the border from Spain into Gibraltar, many of them for work. And these new checks are likely to create significant delays and could seriously disrupt the livelihoods of both Gibraltarians and the thousands of Spaniards who depend on that daily flow of workers. And this could be just the beginning. If more Brexit-related requirements come into force, the situation could even get worse. For many in Gibraltar, the priority is no longer about identity or sovereignty. It's about ensuring that people can move freely across the border and that the local economy isn't strangled by red tape. So while political debates about Gibraltar's Britishness will always exist, the real everyday concerns for the people living and working there are more about Brexit's fallout than about Spain reclaiming the rock. In fact, Spain itself isn't pushing for any major change in Gibraltar's status. While there are occasional nationalist outbursts, like the chants of Gibraltar is Spanish from Spanish footballers celebrating their Euro victory, these incidents are usually brushed off as jokes or beer-fueled outbursts. Even when Spain's far-right party, the Vox, tries to stir up a parliamentary debate about reclaiming Gibraltar, the issue tends to get buried under broader discussions about national unity and separatism in Catalonia. For the Spanish government, the priority isn't sovereignty over Gibraltar. It's more practical issues like policing, illegal trafficking, and ensuring that workers can continue to cross the border easily. The Spanish authorities in the region surrounding Gibraltar, Andalusia, are far more focused on maintaining peaceful coexistence than on reigniting a centuries-old territorial dispute. So in reality, the question of whether the UK will give up Gibraltar is far more nuanced than it might initially appear. What's really at stake here isn't some grand decision about sovereignty, but the more mundane yet crucial issue of how Brexit is reshaping the daily lives of people in Gibraltar. And here's where the UK government's actions or inactions come into play. The British government has faced criticism for not giving enough consideration to the consequences of Brexit for Gibraltar. Much like the situation in Northern Ireland, where the realities of Brexit have led to significant political and economic challenges, Gibraltar has become a victim of the unintended consequences of the UK's departure from the EU. In Gibraltar's case, the focus has been on maintaining a fluid border with Spain, but that goal has been hard to achieve. And the introduction of biometric checks in November is just one example of how Brexit continues to create obstacles for Gibraltar. So, while the question of sovereignty might grab the headlines, the real issue is whether the UK government is doing enough to protect Gibraltar's interests in the wake of Brexit. The fact that no final agreement has been reached with the EU on Gibraltar's post-Brexit status speaks volumes here. And as time goes on, the longer Gibraltar remains in this limbo, the more its people will feel the impact of these unresolved issues. But let's not forget, this isn't just a problem for Gibraltar. It's a problem for Spain too. As I mentioned earlier, around 15,000 people cross the border from Spain to Gibraltar each day, many of them for work. And if the new border controls create long delays, that's going to hurt the local economy on both sides of the border. And that is why many in Spain, particularly in the Andalusia region, are pushing for a more pragmatic approach to Gibraltar. They recognize that peaceful coexistence and easy cross-border movement are far more important than reigniting old territorial disputes. And even some of the Spanish workers who cross into Gibraltar every day criticize the footballers' Gibraltar is Spanish chants, calling it an old wives' tale and emphasizing that respect and coexistence should be the priority. So where does that leave us? The idea that the UK might give up Gibraltar is, as I said, more of a media headline than a real political threat. Yes, the Chagas Islands decision has sparked some speculation, but the reality is that Gibraltar's future is more tied to the practicalities of Brexit than to any sudden shift in sovereignty. For the people who live in and work in Gibraltar, the main concern is freedom of movement, not political posturing. And while the UK government faces pressure to reach an agreement with the EU that protects Gibraltar's interests, the focus needs to be on resolving the real challenges that Brexit has created. At the end of the day, the UK's decision to give up the Chagas Islands has little to do with Gibraltar's future. But Brexit certainly does. And as long as Gibraltar remains caught in the Brexit limbo, the challenges it faces will continue to mount. So, thanks for watching Outside Views. And as always, we want to hear from you. What do you think about Gibraltar's future? Is Brexit the bigger threat to the ROC, or do you think there's a genuine risk that the UK could one day give it up? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, stay informed, stay engaged, and don't forget to question the narratives you hear. Until next time, and the next video is right here in the end screen.